bring in Arkansas GOP Senator Tom Cotton, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, you have to be just flabbergasted by this. We're going to let you know if we're planning to attack you. We'll tell you when and where so you can get ready.
Well, Ainsley, this book raises some serious concerns. I'd say some of the allegations seem somewhat far-fetched to me. But General Milley and Secretary Austin are going to be testifying in front of Congress in just a few days, and we'll address these concerns. We don't want to jump to conclusions yet, but we'll certainly vet them and see exactly what happened.
Senator, he's got to speak. Senator,
have a principle of civil.
Senator, this is too big for this. We can't wait for him to testify. If this guy is selling us out to China, going behind the President of the United States, and he's still in power, fresh off of the catastrophe in Afghanistan, he's got to address this.
Brian, I know he will address it, and we'll ensure that he addresses it. But this is one of those claims, obviously, that seems a little far-fetched, the idea that an American military general is going to warn an adversary if an attack is coming. As you say, when Donald Trump was never even thinking about a military attack against China, the whole thing is pretty far-fetched. I will say this, though, that book also reports what's been widely reported, what we've heard in Congress just over the last 2 days in testimony from intelligence officers and senior military officers, that Joe Biden disregarded the military advice he received earlier this year about what would happen if he went forward with his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And we ought not to forget that. We ought not be distracted by that ongoing fiasco for which there's so much work still to be done.
Sure. Jennifer Griffin, our Pentagon reporter, says that Pentagon officials say some of the characterizations in the book are not true, but she says he did make multiple calls with his Chinese counterpart and NATO allies that the U.S. not planning a surprise attack on China or anyone else. I mean, Bob Woodward and Robert Costa are both unbelievable reporters. It's not like they've ever had to walk anything back on this nature. So you got to figure at least somebody told them these things, or multiple sources. But ultimately, Senator, if this is true, a big part of America is not going to trust the Pentagon, which is the exact wrong thing for us, because they think, the guy in charge, he's playing the double game.
Yeah, Steve, you're right that we need to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. General Milley will address these matters, and we'll be sure that he does address them. And you're also right that we have a principle going back to George Washington of civilian control of the military. Yeah. No matter how much the left in America disliked President Trump, no matter how much Nancy Pelosi thought he was unfit for office, and no matter how much we disagree with Joe Biden, we have one commander-in-chief who has control of the military in conjunction with Congress's constitutional control of our military, and that is a vital and cherished principle.
Senator, you don't want to judge him until you hear what he says, but if he says, yeah, it's true, I called him a couple of times, then should he quit or should he be fired?
Well, Steve, we need to know if those conversations happen, what occurred in those conversations. It's fairly common for senior military leaders and cabinet members to talk to their counterparts in other countries. So the fact of the conversation is less important than the content of the conversation, and that's why we need to hear straight from the horse's mouth. And that's what we're going to do in the days ahead.
Can you get transcripts of the conversations?
And so I don't know if that particular conversation was transcribed here. It probably was in communist China, but I'm confident that we'll get to the bottom of this in the days ahead.
Okay.
All right, well, yeah, I guess we'll see. Meanwhile, yesterday, there was some progress made on the Senate side because Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had no answer for why you were not able to understand that the Taliban were on the march, taking over that country, surrounding and cutting off Kabul, and it was about to fall. He had no answer to why he left all our military hardware on the battlefield, and now they got about $50 billion worth. And what about the fact that they are now asking for aid from us because they say we owe it because we allowed some of our people to get out? Here's Senator Rand Paul.
You've now released $64 million in aid to Afghanistan. Don't we have some prohibition against giving aid and comfort to the enemy? Are we really naive enough to believe that we're just going to keep sending charity to Afghanistan and they're not going to interrupt it? I think that's a foolish notion. Can you pledge today without equivocation that the Biden administration will not release any of this money to the Taliban?
Absent the Taliban making good on the commitments and expectations of the international community that I've outlined previously, that's correct.
Maybe we could deduct a fee for the weapons they took.
And they also said that the Taliban's calling on us, Americans, to have a big heart. What's your reaction?
You know, Tony Blinken has spent the last 2 days blaming everyone for the debacle in Afghanistan except for the person who bears the blame, Joe Biden. And that's because Tony Blinken has been a longtime aide and yes man to Joe Biden. It's not surprising he came up there and defended the president's claim that this was some kind of extraordinary success, as the president called it. I wouldn't say it's an extraordinary success when we lost 13 Americans to a suicide bomber, when our military had to evacuate over 100,000 people, doing a great job on the ground, a job that they should have never been called to do because of the disorganized and ill-planned evacuation that they had to conduct, because Tony Blinken's State Department, which let's remember is responsible for that kind of drawdown and evacuation of civilians, had not properly planned and organized for it.
Okay, so you want to hear from General Milley before you call for him to resign or explain himself. But we heard from Tony Blinken. Should he resign?
Well, I think the person that's responsible for what's happening in Afghanistan is unfortunately the president, not Tony Blinken, and Tony Blinken is executing the president's policy. There's still some questions I have about Tony Blinken's preparation for this evacuation and exactly how well the State Department planned or how well they didn't plan. I want to get to the bottom of those, and we'll see what those questions prove out in the long run.
His answer is going to be blame Trump. That's the plan I inherited, and that's just not acceptable. He didn't take any other plans from President Trump. In fact, he upended all of them. Senator Tom Cotton, thank you.
Thanks, Senator.